In the winter of 1890, Briar Hollow lay beneath a silence that did not belong to the living. Snow had come early that year, drifting down from the Blue Ridge in sheets so thick the mountains themselves seemed to vanish. People swore the valley grew narrower each night, as if the ridges were leaning inward, listening. Normally, snow brought stillness, peace, children sliding down hills, storekeepers sweeping their stoops, the laughter of neighbors echoing off the frozen creek. But not that. Winter. The snow over Briar Hollow did not behave like snow. It did not soften under boot steps. It did not melt under the lanterns hung along the main road. It did not drip from the rooftops even when the sun dared show its face. Townspeople whispered that the snow was waiting. And for weeks, only one set of footprints ever appeared in its small, barefoot imprints leading from the cemetery gate to the door of the Weller funeral home. No one claimed them. No one dared follow them, and no one could explain why the footprints appeared despite falling snow, despite wind, despite every force that should have erased them. Simply appeared fresh each morning, ending at the same wooden door with its black iron knocker, shaped like a weeping angel. Many believed it was the work of a child, but the nearest home with children was more than a mile away, and not a single boy or girl in Briar Hollow walked barefoot in the dead of winter. Yet the footprints persisted. It was during this strange, bitter season that Marion Weller began her diary, and though her entry started like those of any quiet, lonely child, observations of birds, thoughts about her father's work, prayers for her late mother, they grew darker. Sharper. Closer to the bone. By January's coldest night, her ink had already begun to betray her. The Weller funeral home stood at the edge of town, where briar thickets tangled with dying trees, and the old cemetery stretched behind like a black ocean of stone. The structure was narrow but tall, built with dark cedar boards that absorbed the winter chill. Icicles hung from the eaves like teeth. Its sign preparations and burials creaked in the wind on iron chains, groaning like something in pain. Inside, the place was divided into two worlds. A modest living space for Silas Weller and his daughter Marion, 2 bedrooms, a narrow sitting room, the faint smell of lavender soap from a time when Marion's mother still lived, the embalming room. The preparation table, shelves lined with chemicals, slabs of cold stone, and a back door that opened directly into the cemetery. Folks said the Wellers lived too near death for comfort, that a child ought not fall asleep above a room filled with bodies, that some of those bodies might listen. Silas ignored the gossip. He had a lonely man's patience and a workman's devotion. He kept records, kept to himself, and kept his daughter away from the town's cruelties. But no matter how he tried, the dead had ways of creeping upward, and Marion seemed to hear them. Marion Weller was 12, but looked younger, thin as a reed, with wrists that seemed almost fragile enough to snap. Her hair, a dull chestnut, was usually tied with fraying twine. The schoolteacher called her a ghost of a girl, not unkindly, but with quiet concern. Marion did not run or play or shout. She watched. She listened. People who met her sensed something different, not wrong exactly, but uncanny. She moved lightly, like someone who had learned not to disturb things. She spoke softly, as if her words were meant only for those who truly needed to hear them. Her only comfort was her diary, a gift from her mother, before illness hollowed her out. The diary was small, bound in pale leather that had yellowed with years. The edges of the pages were gold once, now faded. Marion wrote in it every evening by candlelight, sitting at a tiny desk beside her frost-fogged window. And on the night of January 11th, she wrote something her father would not read for weeks. January 11th, 1890 tonight. While father prepared the frozen man, I heard a knocking under the table. It was faint, but it was not the wood. I know the sound wood makes. This was softer. And it came from him. When Silas discovered this entry later, he would insist it was childish imagination. But the knock had been real. He had heard it, too. He just never intended to say so. Briar Hollow, in those years, was a fading coal-backed town, built on a river that no longer flowed clean, crowded with men from the foundry who came home each night, coughing black into handkerchiefs. The streets were hard-packed dirt, frozen into ridges. Horses left steam in the air as they trotted past. Homes leaned with age, their chimneys coughing smoke that smeared the sky. The church stood at the center like a dying sentinel. St. Alden's, a whitewashed structure with peeling paint and a bell that tolled too often, it seemed. For the wrong reasons. Folks worked, folks prayed, folks grieved. Death visited Briar Hollow frequently. But, except it didn't anymore. Strange sightings had begun earlier that winter. Shapes near the cemetery gate, lantern light wavering when no wind blew, voices echoing from the old mine, shafts long since collapsed. But the worst of it began with the snow. Snow that refused. The laws of time and season. Snow that held prints long after they should have faded. The same prints Marion drew carefully in her diary margins. The coldest event of that winter, both in temperature and omen, arrived on January 10th, when the body of Josiah Pike was found near the old mill. He was a drifter, a man who came into town 2 months earlier looking for work, but finding only odd jobs and quiet suspicion. He was discovered upright against a wall, eyes open, beard frosted white, fingers curled as though clutching unseen threads. When they touched him, his body was hard as stone. Silas brought him to the funeral home on a sled, the runners scraping against ground that refused to thaw. Marion watched from the stairwell as her father prepared him. She was not supposed to be there, but Silas was too tired or too distracted to shoo her away. She could see Pike's face clearly, gray lips, hollowed cheeks, the faint impression that something had startled him in his final moment. January 11 continued. I think Mr. Pike knew he was going to die. His eyes looked like they were waiting for something. Maybe they still are. Silas placed 2 copper coins on Pike's eyelids to keep them closed. 1 coin slid off, twice only. After Silas whispered something, a phrase Marion could not hear, did the eyelids stay shut. The humming at dusk strange sounds began soon after Pike's arrival. First came the humming. Children walking home from school claimed they heard a girl's voice humming an old Appalachian hymn. Come lay by my side where the cedars bend low. They insisted the voice came from near the cemetery. Parents dismissed it. Then adults began hearing it too low, drifting, almost tender in tone. Some nights it sounded like a lullaby. Other nights, like something trapped behind stone. Reverend Alden, the aging minister of St. Alden's, claimed he heard the voice inside the church while locking up. Even though he'd been alone, the humming stopped only when he whispered, "Not tonight." He never explained what he meant. One morning in late January, the townsfolk woke to a rumor so unsettling it traveled faster than coal dust on a windy day. The footprints had returned. But this time, they didn't begin at the road. They didn't come from any house. They didn't cross the yard. They simply began, clean and perfectly formed, 2 feet in front of the cemetery gate. As though someone had been set down from the air itself. The prints were small, delicate, unmistakably those of a child. And once again, they led straight to the Undertaker's back door and stopped. When the sheriff investigated, he found the snow around the prints pristine, no approaching tracks, no disturbance. He pressed his boot into the snow beside them. His print sank 2 inches. The child's print was shallow, barely more than a whisper upon the surface. He left quickly after that. Some said he muttered, "The snow won't take her weight." Others claimed he crossed himself, but the footprints became a nightly occurrence, fresh each dawn. Sometimes wandering slightly, sometimes overlapping themselves, as though the child had paced Dot by the third week. They were accompanied by another sign colon, HANDPRINTS. Small. Faint, trailing along the siding of the Weller home at shoulder. Height. Too high for a living child to reach without stretching. Marion saw more than the footprints. She began waking awake to faint, tapping along the floorboards beneath her room. Once. Twice. Then again. Like someone rapping politely. Is someone down there? She whispered once. The tapping stopped. She called out for her father. Silas answered from the far end of the house. Too far to be beneath her. The diary recorded her fear in careful script. January 14. The floor spoke again. Tonight, not loud. Just enough for me to wake. I think someone is calling up from Father's workroom. But Father says he keeps all the dead locked in their boxes. She paused, then wrote something more faintly. Boxes don't stop everything. Marion's health worsened with every passing day. Dark circles beneath her eyes, hands shaking slightly when she wrote. But she insisted she was not ill. She said she was listening. Listening to what? She didn't say. Townspeople, once indifferent to the Undertaker, now crossed the street to avoid his windows. Market women whispered about Marion, claiming she was too white for a child, too quiet for comfort, too watchful for innocence. The blacksmith's wife claimed she saw Marion standing in the cemetery at dawn, staring at the tree line, her breath not foggy, and Briar Hollow, that small bruised valley, felt as though something ancient had burrowed beneath it. Waiting. Listening. Remembering. But the true horror hadn't begun. Yet. It would start with the next burial, and with a truth Silas Weller had locked away, even from himself, the truth about his daughter, and the truth about the dead that followed her. The winter of 1890 did not relent. Briar Hollow sank deeper into itself, chimneys coughing smoke, shutters trembling in the wind, livestock growing restless for reasons no one could explain. The air had a heaviness, as if it carried something unsaid between each gust of cold. Silas Weller knew the dead better than he knew the living. He had seen bodies twisted by mine collapses, withered by sickness, drained by river drownings. He had prepared infants who never took their first breath, and old men who held their last breaths too long. He had never experienced what came after Josiah Pike arrived. The first knock had been faint, a mere tap soft enough to dismiss, but the second knock 2 days later made Silas dropped the scalpel from his hand. It happened in the embalming room, where Pike's body lay still on the preparation table, wrapped in linen. The room was dim, lit by a single glass lantern that threw long trembling shadows along the walls. The air was cold, not unusual for winter, but the cold felt pressed into the skin, as if the room itself inhaled. Silas leaned over Pike's chest to adjust the cloth. Then tap, tap, tap. 3 short knocks, not from the ceiling, not from the walls, but from beneath the table. Silas stiffened, breath catching mid-exhale. He bent low, trembling hands pulling back the edge of the linen. He lifted the hanging cloth that draped the table's underside. Nothing. He looked at Pike's face. The eyelids fluttered, just once, and unnatural. Silent twitch too swift for a dead man's slow decay. Silas backed away, breath shaking. He whispered the same phrase he had used days before, the phrase he reserved only for the dead who troubled him. Be still, wanderer. Pike's eyelids ceased their movement. The lantern wavered. Something unseen settled back into silence. Marion had been standing quietly on the basement steps. Silas didn't hear her approach. She moved like a memory light, absent of weight. Father, she said softly, you should not speak to him like that. Silas's jaw tightened. I've told you not to come down here. He was only asking. Silas froze. Marion. What did you hear? Marion stepped closer, her face calm in a way that frightened him more than any. Corpse. He knocked 3 times, she murmured. 3 means a question. Silas's throat dried. Children have no reason to know such things. I've told you, he said carefully. The dead cannot speak. Marion blinked slowly. But they can knock. Her diary captured the moment in steady, almost chilling script. January 17th. Father lies to me because he is afraid. Mr. Pike wanted something. I heard the question in the way he knocked. I think he is cold. They are all cold. Below the sentence. Marion drew 3 small circles open, empty rings like eyes waiting to be filled. Within days of Pike's burial, Briar Hollow began to murmur with new superstitions. Men in the foundry complained their tools slipped from their hands without warning. As though nudged by invisible fingers, women claimed the breeze carried a child's laughter when no children played outdoors. Horses refused to pass the Weller property, planting their hooves and shivering violently. Reverend Alden began holding his lantern up to the graveyard each evening, searching for something he refused to name. He found nothing but snow, unmelted, undisturbed. Except always for those footprints. Bare, small, perfect. Leading to the Undertaker's back steps. The letter that arrived without a CARI on the morning of January 20th. Silas found a folded letter on his back stoop. No footprints led to it. No wagon had passed. The envelope was made of thick parchment, brittle with age. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and unfamiliar. Inside was a single line. She sings to them. Do not let her sing. No signature. No sender. Silas burned the letter immediately. But the smoke rose straight upward, unnaturally straight, like a thread pulled taut into the sky. Marion asked what the letter said. Silas told her it was nothing. Marion wrote, January 20th, Father hides thee. Warnings, but the dead do not warn, they follow. They know me. They remember me, even if I do not remember myself. Days later, a farmer named Jonah Price reported something that sent the town into a spiral of fearful gossip. Jonah slept lightly, always had, ever since he returned from the war with nightmares clawing at his mind. One night he woke before dawn. Unable to explain why, he lit a candle, looked out his frost-laced window, and saw a girl standing half buried in the snow. Barefoot. Motionless. Facing the road. Jonah swore she wore a white dress stiff with ice. Her hair hung straight, unmoving despite the wind, and though her face was pale, her eyes were darker than the night behind her. He called out to her. She turned. Slowly, he said. Her mouth formed a shape, almost a smile, almost a warning. Then she vanished. No footsteps. No blur of movement. No sign she had ever been there. Jonah visited the Weller house the next day. His hands trembled as he described what he saw. Marion listened from the hallway, unnoticed. When Jonah finished, pale and shaking, Marion spoke. It wasn't her, she said softly. Jonah blinked. Who wasn't it? The girl in the snow. Her voice did not tremble. She only comes when it's warm. Jonah left immediately, refusing to return. Marion's diary entries grew stranger, more fragmented, more obsessive, written in looping spirals rather than orderly lines. It was as if she had learned to write in a new rhythm, one the living were not meant to follow. January 2-3. I heard the dead walking last night. They do not crunch the snow, they glide beneath it. Like fish under ice. January 24. Someone knocked on my window. My room is on the 2nd floor. January 2-5. I keep dreaming of the river. I think I have drowned. Before. Between the entries, she drew small shapes. Circles. Lines. Symbols. that resembled old burial marks from mountain folk rituals. Marks Silas had seen carved on ancient headstones but never taught to his daughter. Silas began to worry that Marion needed help beyond his understanding, but every doctor he knew had long since left Briar Hollow for better towns and better fortunes, except one, Dr. Pembroke, the man who feared the Weller home nearly as much as Silas did. Pembroke arrived on January 28th, coat flecked with snow and spectacles fogging in the cold air. He was a thick-bodied man, gray hair thinning, hands too soft for the harshness of mountain medicine. But he knew fear when he saw it, and he saw it in Silas's eyes the moment he walked through the door. "Is she ill?" the doctor asked. Silas shook his head. "Not ill," he whispered. "Changed." Pembroke ascended the narrow staircase to Marion's room. He knocked gently. "Marion? May I come in?" Her voice was clear, composed. "Yes, doctor." Pembroke entered and froze. Marion sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by sheets of paper. Each page was filled with drawings, faces. Rows and rows of faces. Some familiar, townsfolk, miners. Silas himself. Others he did not recognize. Some faces lacked eyes. Some were smiling horribly. Some were mere outlines that felt more suggestion than human. "Do you know who these are, child?" Pembroke asked. Marion nodded. "They are the ones who ask." Pembroke swallowed. "Ask what?" "To come inside." Silas stepped into the doorway, his expression hollow. Pembroke whispered, "Silas, have you heard anything unusual in the nights?" Silas hesitated. Marion answered instead, "Father hears the knocking," she said simply. "He just pretends he doesn't." Pembroke left in such a hurry he forgot his gloves. Never returned to Briar Hollow. By early February, the town was a quiet shell of itself. Most refused to leave their homes after dusk. Rumors spread that the dead were waking in their graves not as bodies, but as whispers that slid between cracks in doors, under floorboards, across the snow. One man, Elias Birch, claimed he heard his dead sister calling his name in the night wind. Another swore that he saw his deceased mother sitting on his porch, knitting calmly despite the cold. A child began sleepwalking, always ending up near the cemetery. But the most unsettling report came from Reverend Alden. He claimed he heard a full conversation in the cemetery, between two voices he recognized from funerals long past. His final sermon mentioned shadows that speak, and after that Sunday, he closed the church indefinitely. The bell fell silent. The town began to withdraw into itself, waiting for spring that would not come. When the second death of winter occurred, no one wanted Silas to perform the burial. The body belonged to Emma Price, Jonah's wife, who did not die from illness, nor injury, nor mishap. She simply stopped talking, stopped responding, stopped breathing. Jonah found her sitting upright in a chair, eyes open, hair unmoving despite the draft that blew through the room. "No struggle," Jonah whispered. "No pain. She just froze." Emma was brought to the Weller home the next morning. Silas prepared her quietly. Marion watched again, and that night she wrote, "February 3,000,000 rupees. Price does not belong to the dead. She was taken too soon. Something else pulled her away. Something that needed her voice. Asterisk. It is calling for me too, but I have not answered. Not yet. The night after Emma's burial, the humming returned. This time it was louder. People heard it clearly echoing through the streets, drifting from the cemetery. She hummed the same Appalachian hymn, "Come lay by my side where the cedars bend low." But this time, a second voice hummed with her. Not human. Not alive. Low. Rattling. Like something that had learned the tune by listening from inside a coffin. Marion sat by her window, listening. She did not hum along. She did not look afraid. She looked expectant. On February 4th, Silas woke to find something new carved into the snow. Outside his door, not footprints, not handprints, words, perfectly formed. As though drawn by an invisible fingertip, the same message as the mysterious letter. Only now. Written in the one place no living hand would dare stand long enough to carve. Marion read the words. She smiled faintly. "They think singing wakes the dead," she said. Silas's voice trembled. "Does it?" Marion shook her head. Double quotes. "No, it keeps them calm." She paused. "It's the silence that wakes them." That night, the Weller home vibrated, not violently, not with force, but with a steady, rhythmic tremor like dozens of fingertips brushing the walls from the inside. Silas held his breath. Vibrations moved down the hallway, up the staircase, toward Marion's room. Then tapped on her door. Once, twice, slow, deliberate. Silas grabbed the lantern and rushed to her room. The tapping stopped. Marion was sitting upright in bed, eyes open, breathing calmly. "They're waking sooner now," she whispered. Silas felt his heart turn to ice. "Who is waking?" he asked. Marion looked at him with a softness he would remember for the rest of his life. "All of them." By mid-February of 1890, Briar Hollow had grown quieter than any winter before. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but silent in the way a forest becomes silent when wolves patrol its edges. People stopped visiting each other after sunset. Curtains stayed drawn. The saloon shuttered early each night. Even the foundry's hammering diminished, as though the ironworkers feared waking something sleeping beneath the valley. But inside the Weller funeral home, the dead were already awake, and they were not sleeping. They were watching. Silas knew this long before the town suspected it. He had known it for years. And he had written down everything he dared not say. After the tapping on Marion's door, Silas forbade her from going downstairs. He locked the basement each night, hiding the key beneath his pillow. Yet every morning he found the lock unlatched, the door cracked open, a draft rising from below like the exhale of something cold. Silas began checking each coffin twice, once at dusk, once at dawn. He counted. He recounted. And each time, he was greeted with the same impossible truth. All coffins remained closed. All bodies remained in place. Yet the basement door opened on its own, and the ledger, the one he kept hidden, seemed closer to discovery with every misplaced breath. On the night of February 10th, a storm swept down from the ridge. The wind howled like a pack of starving hounds, shaking the shutters and rattling loose nails from the siding. Lanterns flickered. Floorboards creaked. Snow slashed violently against the windows. Silas was repairing a lantern wick when he heard Ida, sound that froze his spine, a soft, childlike laugh. From the basement. Not Marion's, never Marion's. This laugh carried age. Wait. Rod. He crept down the staircase slowly, lantern trembling in his hand. The light drew shadows across the walls that seemed to rise and fall like breathing. At the foot of the stairs, Silas paused, heart pounding. Something skittered across the far corner, too quick to see clearly. Too small to be a man, too tall to be an animal. The lantern dimmed as if smothered. He felt eyes watching him from the darkness. The laugh came again, higher this time. Mocking. Silas fled. He slammed the basement door shut, bolted it, and braced his back against it. The door did not move. No force pressed against it. The house grew still again, but the laugh did not leave his ears. It would echo in him for the rest of his days. The next morning, Silas found Marion sitting at the kitchen table, her diary open, hands folded neatly. "You heard her," Marion said. Silas stiffened. "Who?" "The girl beneath the floor." Silas's lips tightened into a thin line. "There is no girl," he whispered harshly. Marion tilted her head slightly. studying her father with an unreadable expression. "She asked for me again," Marion said. "She said she remembers how cold it was." Silas swayed, gripping the edge of the table. "Marion, what did she say her name was?" Marion blinked slowly. "She said her name is mine." Silas's knees buckled. He sat down hard, breathing unsteadily. Marion watched him with the patient calm of someone gently waiting for another to catch up to a truth they've long known. "Father," she said softly, "why won't you tell me what happened last winter?" Silas lowered his face into his hands. 2 days later, as snow fell in thin, icy needles, Reverend Alden appeared at the Weller doorstep. He looked older than he had weeks earlier, deep lines beneath his eyes, beard untrimmed, hands trembling with cold or fear or both. "Silas," the Reverend whispered, "we must speak." Silas stepped aside reluctantly, letting the man in. Marion stood at the top of the stairs, watching. Alden removed his hat, wringing it tightly. "There are voices," Alden said, "in my church, in the graveyard, in the wind." Silas said nothing. Alden continued, voice cracking. "Last night, I heard 2 voices arguing among the headstones. 2 women I've buried years apart. They argued about who gets to return first." Silas closed his eyes. Alden swallowed. "And then one of them said your daughter's name." Silas snapped his eyes open. "My daughter is alive." Alden's gaze drifted up toward the staircase where Marion stood silently. "Yes," he whispered. "Is she?" Silas's face hardened. "That's enough," he said. "Leave." Alden hesitated, then reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "I found this in my pew this morning," he said. "I believe it was meant for you." He set the paper on the table and hurried out into the storm. Silas unfolded it with shaking hands. The handwriting was the same as the earlier letter, elegant, slanted. "She returned once. She will return again, and when she does, she will not come alone." Marion watched him read it. Her expression remained still, but her fingers tightened slightly on the railing. That night, scratching began in the walls, slow, persistent, as though long fingernails dragged across wooden beams. Silas pressed his ear against the plaster. "It's rats," he murmured, convincing no one. Marion shook her head. "They're not rats." "Rats don't call my name." Silas stiffened. "What did you hear?" Marion's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. She said, "Let me in." She said she's so cold. She said I left her in the river. Silas backed away, breath shaking. Marion sat on her bed calmly. "I think I should remember her," she said. "She remembers me." Silas closed the door without answering. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the rocking chair outside Marion's room, listening to the scratching in the walls grow closer. Closer until it pressed directly behind Marion's headboard. And then, just before dawn, silence. The quiet was worse. 2 days later, Marion vanished. Silas woke to find her bed empty, her diary open on the windowsill, snow drifting softly onto the pages. There were no footprints in the snow below the window. No signs of escape. No disturbance. Just emptiness. He searched the house frantically. The cemetery. The woods behind the Undertaker's lot. Nothing. The neighbors claimed they heard humming before dawn. 2 voices now, twisted together like strands of rope. Silas returned to the house, heart numb, steps dragging, and then he heard something from the basement. A thud. Soft. Rhythmic. Like someone tapping on wood. He unlocked the basement door with trembling hands. The lantern flickered to life, illuminating the cold stone floor. No bodies had moved. No coffins were open, but something else was wrong. The floorboards beneath the preparation table were ajar, pushed up from below. Silas's heart dropped. He knelt, prying the loose boards aside. A hollow space lay beneath, small, cramped, lined with old burlap. And inside, wrapped tightly, was a large, leather-bound ledger stained with years of damp and darkness. The Undertaker's ledger, His ledger, the one he had hidden since the winter before. He had buried it there. To forget. To protect her. To protect himself. But the dead did not forget. And neither, it seemed, had Marion. Silas carried the ledger up to the work table, hands trembling. The cover was cold unnaturally, so as though it had been kept in the soil itself. He opened it. The first pages were as he remembered: dates, names, conditions, burial sites. The mundane record of a man who tended to the dead. But then the notations began. Small handwriting in the margins. A single, terrible word repeated beside certain entries. Beside Thaddeus Crow. Returned. One night after burial. Beside Emma Price. Returned before lowering. Voice not her own. Beside Josiah Pike. Returned before waking fully. And then came the page he had hidden, deepest one he had prayed never to see again. Marion Weller, December 3, 1889. Returned immediately. Silas squeezed his eyes shut. His breath hitched. His hands shook violently, rattling the lantern. I brought her back, he whispered. God forgive me. I brought her back. Last winter had been crueler than most. Marion had fallen sick suddenly. Fever, chills, delirium. Consumption, the doctor said. Nothing to be done. She died in the night, her small hand slipping from his. Silas had buried her the next day, tears freezing on his cheeks as he lowered, barefoot, smiling faintly, her breath white. Father, she whispered. It's cold. Silas had fallen to his knees, sobbing, pulling her inside his arms. He had not questioned, he had not thought, he had simply believed. He believed because grief blinds men. He believed because hope deceives better than any demon. He believed because he needed her. Now, staring down at the ledger, his hands shook violently. I'm a fool, he whispered. I'm a wicked fool. A soft creak came from behind him. Silas turned slowly. Marion stood at the top of the basement steps. Her eyes were calm. Her hair was dry, her dress unwrinkled. As though she had never left at all. Father, she said warmly, you shouldn't read that. Silas fell backward, knocking over the lantern. It rolled across the floor, flame flickering dangerously. Marion, he whispered, where were you? Marion smiled gently. I was remembering. She descended the steps slowly. The river is so quiet, Father. You should have left me there. Silas trembled. I couldn't. I know, she said softly. Then she stopped halfway down the stairs. Behind her, something moved. A shadow. Small. Childlike. Silas single quotes. Breath froze. Marion looked over her shoulder. She came back too. Marion whispered. She said you never finished burying her. Silas felt the room darken. The cold deepened. And someone else stepped into view behind Marion, small, barefoot. Her face pale as the snow. Her eyes black as river stones, and her mother mouth was smiling. Silas did not scream. He did not move. He watched. The shadow behind Marion leaned forward until its shape separated from the staircase darkness like a peeling layer of night. A child stood there. Bare feet. Wet hem. Eyes like river stone. Smile again, small, patient, as if waiting for a cue from someone already in the room. Don't be afraid, Marion whispered. She asked so long. You kept the door closed. Silas found words, brittle as frost. What is her name? Marion tilted her head, listening not to the room, but to the chill. She says she had 3. She kept none. She answers to mine because I dropped it once. A pause. Almost tender. She picked it up. Silas took a stumbling step backward. The lantern guttered. Somewhere in the rafters, something sighed wood, or winter, or the house learning a new breath. The child moved no closer. She only looked past Silas to the embalming table, to the ledger lying open where the page showed Marion Weller returned immediately. Her smile thinned. Marion turned to her as if to a skittish colt. "Do you want to see the place where I woke?" she asked softly. The child's head dipped the smallest measure. Silas pressed his palms to his eyes. "Marion, do not go down." "You must not." But Marion was already descending. Her step sounded like no weight at all. The other child followed without sound. The room chilled, glass foged. The flame steadied as if the cold had calmed it. Silas's voice cracked. "Who are you?" he asked the quiet air. No one answered. He trailed them helpless, hollowed until they stood before the loose boards under the table. Marion knelt, placing her hand to the wood. It shivered. The boards lifted from beneath as though a deep breath swelled the ground. "Here," Marion murmured, "between the floor and the soil." He hid the book where he hid the truth. She looked up at Silas. Her face was neither accusing nor kind, just the face of a child who knows more than comfort allows. "Father," she said. "There are more than one of me." He swallowed. "What do you mean?" Marion touched the ledger. "They followed when I did. Not all at once. Not with bodies. With wanting." Silas thought of the letters that arrived without carriers. Of the message in snow. Of Reverend Alden's voices in the graveyard. He understood nothing. And everything, and nothing again, outside. The wind rose into a long, braided sound. It might have been weather. It might have been a choir. The story of Briar Hollows. River is older than the town, older than the mills, older than the cedar posts that mark the oldest. Dead. It comes from the mountain folk who were here before the iron, before the schools, before maps knew these folds by name. They said the river did not cut the land. They said it remembered its way through it, that every spring flood was nothing but the river rehearsing its own birth. When someone died in winter and the ground locked up, mountain folk brought the dead to the river. Just for a night, just until thaw. They laid them on cedar boards and spoke a hymn no one wrote, and the found in the sheriff's desk after his departure for Luray. Pencil on paper. Draft, UNSENT. To Reverend Alden. If you will not speak to the Undertaker, I must. The tracks are wrong as ever, begin nowhere, end at the same place. I followed them at dusk like a fool, and saw what I should not. A child standing on the Undertaker's porch rail, like a bird. She watched me with a face not unkind but wrong in the cold. I tipped my hat. She did the same, without moving her hand. You will say I'm drunk. I am not. I took measure of the tracks with a surveyor's line. Each step is the same. Each step is shorter than the last. That is a thing I cannot understand. J. Halle, Sheriff Asterisk. The paper ended there. Crease marks stiff with melted snow. The sheriff left town that evening, and did not return. People saw more in those days, because they stayed still long enough to see. They saw, just before dawn, a single lantern swing by itself at the cemetery gate. They saw, near the old mine entrance, frost that looked like finger trails 4, 5, then 8. Then none. They saw the foundry smoke blow east when the wind whistled west. Mrs. Lucinda Carr, who had buried 3 sons to the mountain and 2 to the river. Boiled water each night, though no tea remained. She waited at her window with 2 cups, because she knew the dead keep appointments even when we forget. She claimed a girl came once and did not drink. Just pressed both palms to the kettle and smiled at the heat without warming. When asked how she knew the visitor was not the living Undertaker's daughter, Lucinda frowned. The living look at you, she said. The other kind look through. Word traveled from kitchen to kitchen, house to house, store to shutter, but it traveled softly as winter dust and exchanged more of breaths than voices. Don't go out after dusk. Don't hum in the yard. Don't answer if the dead knock politely. And, above all, don't let the girls sing. Marion did not sing. Not in the house, not where her father could hear. But the air remembered her tune. Old boards hold notes the way linen holds a scent. Some evenings, a sound rose from under the floor, not quite a voice, not quite a draft, but the shape of voice leaves. In a room after the voice is gone, Marian listened to it like a teacher listens to a timid child. Her head bowed. Her hands still. Silas wedged furniture against the basement door. He slept in the chair outside Marian's room again and again until sleep, frayed, and fear learned his schedule. On the fourth night, near to dawn, his head jerked up from the chair back, not to a knock, to a chord, as though the house had found a mouth and pressed it to a single note, low, sustained, not loud. Marian stood in her doorway. Her hands were clasped at her chest. She looked smaller, or the hallway had learned to stretch. "Father," she said softly, "they are cold and I am warm. It hurts them." He shook his head. "You are not warm, child. You are freezing." She smiled sadly. "I mean in the other way." It began on a Thursday, the 20th of February, when the sky bruised purple at noon and never recovered its color. Near dusk, the first people saw them, not in a cluster, not at once, one by one. Across the valley. Mr. Hargreave from the mill house was the earliest report. He swore he watched 3 pale figures drift along the ridge like unfixed fog. Then a line, then stand, then begin to move in deliberate human cadence. A young teamster saw a woman he'd hauled to the grave the winter prior. Her dress, he said, fluttered in no wind. He threw a blanket over the team and lay under the wagon until the dark lengthened and his courage shrank to a size he could hide. Before full dark, 10, 20, 30 separate accounts braided into a single sentence the whole town understood without anyone speaking it aloud. The dead are walking, and they are headed for the Weller home. Silas felt it first as pressure in his teeth. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the night thicken into something more than absence. Marian stepped beside him. She held his sleeve the way she had at age 5 when thunder stumbled over the hills. "They are not angry, Father," she said. "They are only cold. Why do they come here?" He whispered. Marian looked up at him with a sorrow too precise for a child. "Because you opened the door once, and because I kept humming." Silas took the iron key from his pocket. He thought of throwing it into the stove. He thought of swallowing it. He thought of giving it to the night and begging the night to keep it. He put it back in his pocket. "I saw them pass, not like a mob, not like soldiers, like a line for bread, quiet, faces forward. Their steps were light, but I heard something, not feet, a sound like frost taking the pain. I counted 12, then lost my reckon, then knew I should not be counting at all. They did not look at me. Except one. The last, she had hair like straw wetted down and a mouth that kept a little smile from leaving. I said, 'Emma,' because my mouth did that of its own, and she did not answer, which is an answer. I followed a ways and saw them stop at Weller's. They did not go in. They made a waiting shape. Then the door opened and the Undertaker came out with nothing but his voice. He said, 'You will not take her.' I could not hear the reply. It was not in my ear, it was in my teeth. I left. Silas opened the door and stood on the stoop. Snow lay even and bright, moonless, yet faintly lit as if the sky had a low fever. Before him, the line had no end and no beginning. Shape after shape, pale upon paler, assembled without crowding. They did not smoke breath. They did not shiver. They watched him without watching, that through and not at way of looking. "Go back," Silas said, voice steady from somewhere he did not own. "You cannot have her." The first figure stepped forward, a man Silas knew by labor and by last rites. Thaddeus Crow, chest broken by a mine mouth. But this was not Thaddeus as he had lain. This was Thaddeus as Cole remembers, a scene, dark eyes polished, a face erased of whatever made it nameable. He opened his mouth. No sound came. Silas nevertheless understood. She is already ours. Silas shook his head. She is mine. The crowd moved, an almost breath. Not closer, not farther. You brought her back, Thaddeus said without saying. You put a warm name in cold air. The air kept it. Silas pressed his palm to the doorframe to keep from swaying. I did what any father would. I took her from the river. Rivers do not lose, said the not voice. Rivers wait. He thought of the ledger. He thought of the word returned lying down columns like tally marks. A jailer dreads. What will you do if I let you in? Silas asked. Behind him, the boards whispered a shift, perhaps Marion's step, perhaps the house learning another note. The not voice shaped a reply the way frost shapes fern. Not take, not harm. Put back. Back where? The crowd lifted their faces the way trees turn leaves at a change in air. Dot up. Not down. Toward the long low tug beyond sound, where water remembers. Silas felt the ledger's leather under his fingertips. The page where his daughter's name sat like a verdict and a stay of execution sharing a line. He spoke into the cold. No. The line did not bristle. It merely waited. Silas felt a small hand take his. Marion stood at his side. Her face was pale but clear. No fear. Just the calm of someone who knows the end of a song and is not rushed to meet it. I am so tired of choosing, she said gently. Every night I choose. I choose quiet. I choose you. And then I feel them waiting, and the choice grows teeth. Silas shook his head. You are alive. She smiled with pity that did not belittle. I am returned. The word, spoken aloud, rang like the church bell with no rope. The crowd did not stir. The wind did. Marion lifted her chin. I will walk with them, she said, only to the gate. You need not follow. Silas clutched her hand. Child, she squeezed back with surprising strength, please. If you follow, the door will stay open. If you stay, it may close. His mouth could not form agreement. His body understood. Before his mind, she stepped off the stoop. The snow took her weight without indenting. The line parted just enough to admit. Her small figure slipped among them. As a stitch disappears into a seam and becomes the fabric itself. Silas watched, nails biting his palms, breath refusing to fog. The procession turned as one and moved toward the cemetery. No sounds of feet, only that delicate pain singing, like frost taking hold. February 20 I will go because I already went and only pretended not to. I think time is a rope, and Father holds one end and the river holds the other, and I am the knot. If I sing, the knot loosens. If I am silent, the knot tightens. Both hurt. Tonight I will not sing. Tonight I will listen. If I do not return, it will not be because they kept me. It will be because I stopped keeping them. The ink on this entry bled outward in a feathered halo, as if a wet fingertip pressed each letter. Just after it dried. Silas followed anyway, but he stopped short of the yard. His body obeyed the fear his mind denied. From the porch he saw them reach the cemetery gate. Not all entered, many stood there, arranged like a ledger reads down a page, one by one, each name facing the next stone's face. A few crossed the threshold and knelt not like prayer, but like animals relearning a bed. Marion reached the gate and turned. Her eyes found him in the dark. She lifted her hand in a motion that was wave, and benediction and farewell and command all at once. Then she stepped through. The iron squealed, though it did not move. The first keen of the night arrived, then not human. Not nightbird, not the wind's narrow screaming when it threads a gap, but something larger, the sound of a ledger being closed on a table far away. Silas braced himself on the porch post. He whispered the phrase he had taught himself for nights when grief came like a tide. "Be still." Wanderer. The night did not still. It breathed in. Every lantern in town felt it. Wicks quivered. Flames leaned. Men woke. Women sat upright. Children began to cry without knowing whose name they'd lost. Silas took a step, one only, off the stoop. The porch plank cracked, like ice under a sudden load. He stopped. At the gate, Marian lowered her hand and faced the stones. The procession bent its heads. And thin as softly as a hand laid on a fevered browsulence. Settled. Long. Deep. Unnatural. Silas realized what he was listening for only when he could not find it. He could not hear the river. The hush lasted long enough to bruise the night. Then sound returned in layers. First faint humming, not from Marian, from many low, breathless like a choir without tongues. Then a second layer, something like thin ice sheeting over water. Then a third, smallest voice, a child's, the one that had laughed under the floor. Now it did not laugh. It counted. 1, 2, 3. Silas did not hear numbers. He heard the shape of counting. The gate did not open. The procession did not move. But the snow just inside the fence began to collapse in long, narrow dents, though graves took back the measure of their dead. 4, 5, 6. Silas bent at the waist. He pressed his fist to his mouth. Marian stood very still, her head bowed. When the counting ceased, the humming faded to the rustle of skirts that were not there. The night exhaled. The river's sound returned far, small, sure of itself. Silas lifted his head. The cemetery was empty. The gate stood alone. The snow, for the first time that winter, began to melt. A line of water formed and ran toward the road. Thin as a vein, Marian was gone. Erf did not go down the steps. Not that night. Not in the dawn that came like a truce. Neighbors would later say they saw him stand on his porch until morning, and then sit on the top step as though he were guarding a door. No one else could see. He did not weep. He did not pray. He waited for humming and did not get it. He waited for footprints and did not get them. "I will bring you home." The room did not answer. The house, having learned breath, kept it. He waited for midnight because men who are going to beg should arrive when a place is most itself. He put on his coat, took a short-handled spade, and tucked the ledger into his breast like a shield that could neither stop a blade nor turn a prayer. Outside, the thaw was timid. Frost clung to fence rails like stubborn script. The cemetery gate shone with a whitening edge, iron sweating a ghost of its own. Silas did not turn toward the stones. He turned down the footpath that led to the water. The river did not roar or sulk. It traveled with its old patience, glass over rock, whisper over root. When he reached it, the bank still held a grip of ice where shade lived longest. He knelt. He set the ledger on a flat stone. The leather drank cold. "I will make a trade," he said, voice even, hands not. The river did not change speed. It never has. Silas opened the ledger and turned pages until he found the first. Returned. The ink had paled to the brown of bruised fruit. He traced each entry down the column, names set like teeth, dates like breath marks between them. He wet his thumb and blurred one of the smaller letters. The ink did not feather. It repelled him. "I will cross them out," he said, bargaining with a thing that does not bargain. "Every one. I will give them back to you on the page, if you give me one from your edge." He took a pen. The nib whispered over the leather strap as if withholding opinion. He dipped it into nothing, no inkwell, just intent, and set it to the line that read, "Marian Weller, February 20th, 1890. Returned again. Kept. The pen shook. He drew the faintest stroke. Water climbed the stone as if. Curious, Silas stopped. He realized the error you only make when you have nothing else to try. You cannot cross out a name the river keeps. Can only add another beneath it. He let the pen fall. Small splash sounded somewhere up current. Like the drop of a child's marble, Silas looked up. Only the night in the stream and the thin seam of thaw looked back, recovered from the north bank after the thaw. Paper thin as onion skin, edges torn. Pencil in a child's careful hand. Asterisk if you hear my humming under stone. Set not your ear to frost. The river keeps a tally, child, and never counts one lost. If you hear me walking over snow, let not your door unlatch. I am a stitch you cannot pull, a seam you must not match. Asterisk the edges show a double crease, as if folded and unfolded by cold fingers. A faint thumbprint in black remains where a word was pressed and repressed. Tally. A twig snapped behind him. Silas turned, expecting the town's sheriff from before fear, or Reverend Alden with his mild stubbornness, or a hungry dog with half a mind to bite. A girl stood there. Not Marion. This child was younger, 7, perhaps 8, hair slicked flat by damp, eyes reflecting nothing. She wore a homespun dress dark with river. Her bare feet did not color with cold. She lifted a hand in a movement that was not greeting. It was the echo of one. Have you come far? Silas asked, throat tight. The child smiled with the same small patient expression of all his nights. Back, she said without sound. He understood. Do you know my daughter? The girl considered. The river hissed on rock. She is the door. Silas closed his eyes against the words. When he opened them, the child had stepped closer, not by motion but by decision. She glanced at the ledger on the stone. You keep their names. She not said. I remember them, he whispered. The small head tilted. Remembering is not keeping. Silas reached out careful, slow, and took the ledger up from the stone. Take me instead, he said. A man who had rehearsed this in different rooms and failed to speak it until now. The child's smile did not change. Her gaze moved to the river. It is not a door for that, she said without a mouth. He swallowed what rose in him. Can she, his voice broke, can she speak where she is? The child's expression grew almost puzzled. Like breaking a word open to check the seed inside. She sings. The not voice answered. Silas pressed the ledger to his chest. I cannot hear her. The child looked at him then. Truly looked not through, but into the warm thing that refuses to admit its temperature. That is the mercy, she said. Silas bowed his head. The river said nothing new. When he lifted his eyes, the bank was empty. He pressed his hand to the stone where the ledger had been. It was warm. The next morning, the town swore the footprints had come back. Not the small perfect bare ones. Different. On the front steps of every home, in the melted crust and the dull gray of half-thaw, appeared a single print. A palm, pressed and open-handed. As if someone had measured each door. No trail. No approach. No retreat. Only the mark, faintly wrinkled like a child's skin kept too long in bathwater. By noon the water ran from those prints and left no trace. But some door latches rusted overnight, and those families complain to this day that their hinges breathe when the house settles. At the Weller home, there was no handprint. There were 3. One higher than the others, where a girl of Marion's height might reach to steady herself. Silas placed his palm to each. No sensation, no shock, no sign except the old, soot-dry ache that climbed from wrist to shoulder when a man keeps holding something that cannot be held. He went inside, closed the door, and sat with the ledger. He turned to a blank page. He wrote, "The river does not trade. The river remembers." Then below it, not in his Undertaker's hand but in a larger, almost schoolboy script, as if trying to teach himself he meant it, "I will remember too." He blotted the page meticulously and left it open for air to take what it wanted. Air took nothing. They did not chase him from the valley. They did not burn the house. Mountain folk will let a thing stand if it teaches a lesson no one wants to write down. They let the Wellers remain, the dead one kept, the living one learning the shape of loss. They passed food on steps and knocked soft. They spoke little but listened much when wind answered where walls should. Reverend Alden returned to St. Alden's and opened the doors on Sundays at noon only, when the sun fell fat through the windows, as if the thick light could keep the smaller voices from finding a pew. He preached on rivers for 6 weeks, and then on ledgers for 7, and several in the back wept without knowing whether for water or ink. The foundry men worked with a lifted caution, as if the forge might sing if they cussed too loud. The blacksmith fixed latches the way a doctor closes wounds, with neat intensities and a look of almost apology. Children were taught a new rule with their chores. Do not hum while you fetch water. No one said why. No one needed to. Record of structures. Shenandoah Co. Transcript number 14B site. Former Weller undertaking. Structure weathered. Front porch unsafe. Sign present. Letters ghosted. Preparations and burials. No inhabitants at time of visit. Interior. Ledgers missing from case. Floorboards in prep room loose. Displaced from below. Found fragment of child's diary leaf under stair. Illegible save date. March 2nd, 1890. Nearby graveyard shows unusual melt lines along north fence. Linear depressions approximately 6 inches in width and several yards in length, running toward river. Local informant, Mrs. L. Carr, aged, refused discussion, offered only. The names are kept otherwhere. Advised, mark structure as culturally sensitive. Do not recommend tourist restoration. A later clerk underlined, kept otherwhere in red pencil, and wrote nothing else. Spring came on like a long apology. The river fattened and walked a little up the banks, and then remembered itself and leaned back into its bed. Yellow returned to the world. Windows unlatched. Ovens woke. Silas opened the Weller home to air the winter from its ribs. He left the doors wide so light could learn the rooms again. Dust lifted from the floor and turned in the beams like a congregation of gentle motes. He set the ledger on the windowsill. He took up Marion's shawl and draped it across the back of her chair. He placed a cup beside it, clean and dry. He did not boil water. Then he heard it Kalon tap. Not from the basement. Not from the wall. From the front door. Silas stood without haste. He walked to the threshold. He did not touch the latch. Who calls? He asked, voice even. No answer. Who knocks? He asked, old formula from the undertaker's other trade, the living one, when neighbors asked to visit their sorrow. Silence. Then tap. The sound was small, like someone learning how to be polite. Silas put his hand to the door and leaned forward until his ear rested on the wood. It was warm from sunshine. The grain pressed its slow geography into his skin. Whispered, the way you speak when 2 rooms share a secret. Be still, wanderer. The door quieted. He did not open it. He stepped back and waited. He spoke. After a long pause, not to the door, but to the ledger in the light. You can knock, child, he said softly, in case doors carry messages back to water. But don't ask to come in. This is not for you anymore. It is for me. The house did not answer. He poured air into the shawl's shape so it would remember a shoulder. He sat. He did not sing. March 2nd. Father is gone. Everyone is gone. The dead are quiet now. They follow me only when I sing. Tonight I will cross the ridge. If they come with me, I shall lead them home. A second line below. In another hand, faded but legible, as if pressed with a thumbnail through paper long dry. Home is where the names are kept. Scholars argue whether. This second line belongs to Marion, to Silas, to a later reader, or to the habit the valley has of writing itself upon anything that wants to be blank. The ink resists testing. It stains water that never touched it. People move away. Towns empty and fill. New roofs rise over old beams. Outsiders come with questions and leave with stories they repeat wrong around better fires. But in Briar Hollow, when winter lays right and the first snow holds without a melt, there are things no one argues. The prints do not form anymore. Sometimes the handprints do. Humming comes now and then. From the river bend where the willow leans over like a tired midwife, if you hear the humming, you must not hum back. A few insist that on windless nights the bell at St. Alden's can sound a single note without rope. Reverend Alden went long ago, but the bell knows its work. It is said to have one tone for water, another for ledger, and a third quieter for doors left wisely shut, and the Undertaker's house, when the light leaves quickly in late afternoon, holds a shape at the upstairs window. Not a face, not a shadow, the suggestion of a shawl gathered at a collarbone, the curve of a head, bowed in listening. Listening is a way to keep. Not all keeping is holding. There is a reason. Certain histories do not print easily. They are not hidden. They are heavier than paper. You do not forget them. You set them down so the table will not tilt. The Undertaker's ledger remains unaccounted for. In some tellings, Silas buried it in the riverbank at a place where cedar roots net earth like fingers through hair. In others, he walked with it into the water until the river took both his breath and its book and kept them in separate pockets. A few insist it sits still on a windowsill up the ridge, where the air sweetens a little at noon. And children dare not play under that window for fear of hearing a name they do not yet own. But every version keeps one line. Whether whispered by the foundry men, or written on a WPF form, or told to a child at a door in winter, the river remembers. The ledger follows. The door waits. And if the wind ever pulls the old tune through the fence slats, do as the valley has learned. Hold your breath. Listen. Do not answer, because somewhere a child is counting. Softly, for the rest of us. Her father kept a ledger of the dead, but the river kept the names.